Good morning, everyone. If you don't know me, you most likely know who I think, honestly, is my better half and beautiful wife, Jessica. You may also know my kids, Ben and Josh. My name's Brad Watts, and if I'm here today, I'm probably behind you, all from back in the media area, looking at the back of all your heads. I join you today to tell you a story about my regrowth in Christ and how even the best plans don't always work out the way they may expect. Also, with it being Mental Health Awareness Sunday, I want to help spread some hope that the anxiety and darkness that comes with this, I know I've felt it before, is nothing compared to the light of God. A few months ago, I'd have tried to share this from up front, the same way that Brooke did, the same way that many others have before me. But as you'll probably find out, that's a little more difficult than it used to be for now. Without getting too deep or dragging on too long, I'd like to start off with a little bit of a backstory. You see, I'm not from around these parts. I was originally born out in the deserts, South California, at George Air Force Base. My dad proudly served in the U.S. Air Force, and in turn, I did a lot of moving. It wasn't long after I was born that we were transferred to, of all places, Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. It was there that my brothers were born, at Triple Army Medical Center, known as the Big Pink Hospital on the hill. Needless to say, my parents joked that by the time I was 18 months, I had 20,000 miles on me. It was from there that we moved around a few times. I went from Mississippi to Tennessee to Illinois to Georgia to Iowa, back to Illinois, and then finally down here to Arab. Folks ask how we ended up here, and I can give all of the thanks to the government. By the time we moved down here, my dad was going to kick off a portion of the Army Management Engineering College down on Redstone Arsenal. We started off living for about 6 months at the what used to be the Radisson. It's now, I believe, the Doubletree, while my parents looked for a place to settle down. I remember getting up extra early because we had a 30-minute ride to Arab to go to school. I was just starting the 6th grade. I had a pretty rough time adjusting that first year. Miss Judy Elrod, the school counselor at the time, knew me by name and kept Rolaids in her desk drawer, as my stomach was always in knots. I was always trying to find a way to go home. I was technically alone at that school. I didn't know anyone. This was the beginning of what I would discover to be an anxiety disorder, something that I would eventually have to take medicine for in high school. I even had ulcers in high school. It became manageable though. Despite my anxiety, and though I don't mean to brag, I was considered a pretty smart kid. I vividly remember getting a different colored t-shirt and a pencil box for winning the spelling bee while I was in Georgia. Before leaving Illinois, I was in the gifted classes, and after we moved down here, I was tested and accepted into the advanced classes. Looking back, I have a feeling that in a way, this was also the beginning of something that I didn't understand at the time, but we'll get to that. It wasn't long, and my dad had to make a very challenging decision of what to do next. That college that he was helping expand, it closed. It was then that he began his own new journey and started his own consulting company. That's a whole other story though, something probably he could tell far better than I could. But it's important to mention because it does have an impact on me and my life as I reflect on it. Some folks don't understand what it takes to start a company. It isn't something as simple as creating a name, setting up a storefront. There are connections and relationships that have to be built and risks that have to be taken. You may be the boss holding the keys to the door, but you're also holding the hammer, nails, screws, 2x4s, drywall, all of it, since the building isn't even built yet. At one point, I believe my dad was traveling upwards of 50 of the 52 weeks in a year. He was doing everything that he could so that we could be blessed. There were many times when we missed him those first few years. I guess I'm digressing a bit. One thing that I do remember about that time though, was when my grandma and grandpa had moved here to Arab. When my dad was home, they would come visit on Sunday or we'd go visit them. It's something I kind of miss. We used to have a big lunch. We'd have, roast or something. I mean, my grandma was a great cook. But we'd also take some time and me and my dad and my grandpa would always sit in the living room and we'd talk about the goings on of the day, but we'd also talk about Christianity and religion in general. It was during this time that I picked up on the phrase churchianity. It was how we differentiated between what Jesus taught and what our modern society decided to make out of it. Now, I'm going to be honest. I've never read the Bible from cover to cover, though I have started making an effort. I knew many of the stories and many of the scriptures and many of the names and important people. However, it wasn't until I joined in those moments of fellowship with my dad and my grandpa that I started to pick up more on the importance of context. And as I mentioned in Pastor Nikki's Wednesday night class, the importance of not cherry picking the gospel. That time with my dad and my grandpa helped me start to grow spiritually. It was one year during the Easter program at First Assembly of God there in Bob Wallace Avenue in Huntsville that I accepted Christ. I had grown up in church all my life, in all kinds of churches. This was a different experience though. It is when I realized why I believe. If you ask my wife and kids, I'm usually not an emotional guy. I'm a pretty happy guy, don't get me wrong. I always try to smile, I'm always trying to be optimistic. I can see how it makes others smile and helps them get comfortable. However, I don't often cry, ever. There is one thing though, that I could almost always guarantee to bring tears to my eyes, especially after that night. It was a representation of Jesus and the magnitude of the sacrifice he made for us. If you combine that with music, I'm going to need some tissues. It's an overwhelming sense and presence that I feel. There was an experience here back in 2019 where I almost had to step out of the sanctuary. Some of you may actually remember it. The praise band had the song You Say queued up for the 9 o'clock service. It was the same day that the children were also going to be sharing songs from Jam. So they were all sitting up front. Unexpectedly, when the band started, all of the children joined in. They knew all the words and sang it with all their hearts. I had to sit down. It was absolutely beautiful. I wish I had video to share. God was in that room and he blessed each and every one of us that day. That overwhelming presence, it's why I believe. Unbeknownst to me then, the words to this song would become very important in my life. With all of that out of the way, let me move forward to the meat and potatoes of this story. I've been working in the IT field for more than 20 years. I've been in the field of government or military contract for just about as long. It's a unique world where you never really know when the next contract will start or when this one's going to end. After working for my dad for a few years, I took a step out and started a contract working third shift help desk with an organization now known as LDAC up on their arsenal. It was a unique experience because I was helping soldiers who were literally in Afghanistan calling me over satellite phones. It was exciting and rewarding. After about 9 months, I was approached by one of the project leads from upstairs who had seen my resume. I remember him asking me, do you know Cold Fusion, which is a programming language? I was honest with him. I told him no, but I can buy a book and I can learn it. I got the job. I moved upstairs, first shift, great team. As time went on, I became a subject matter expert for Cold Fusion, all the way to the day that we sunset the toolset and had moved on to newer technologies. Again, learning a new language, becoming one of the guys everyone asked for help. I had been with LDAC for 15 years. I knew just about everyone. I had seen people come, I had seen people go. I had interviewed several of the employees that I worked along with. I survived 4 layoffs and 3 contract renewals. I was moving up into leadership positions of the organization, even leading up one of the entire communities of practice for the developers. I was part of the team that worked on the proposal for the contract renewal, a huge contract that our company had actually won. I was comfortable. Then the other shoe dropped. In October 2020, my past came back to bite me. That probably sounds worse than it may actually be, but to me, it was devastating. I was taken off the contract, not because I wasn't doing my job, not because I wasn't able to help the organization, not because I had made enemies. It was because I didn't have a college degree. A new contracting vehicle meant there were new education requirements. Requirements that seemingly ignored experience and focused on academic degrees. You see, I went to college right after high school, knocking out my academic classes, working on a bunch of electives, but my family took priority. And ironically, so did my career. So I took a break that lasted until just last year. I felt like 15 years of on-site experience with the organization, 20 plus years of experience in the field, and the connections that I had made were suddenly worthless, that I was worthless. I wasn't entirely alone though. There were others who were in the same boat, some even older than me, with even more experience. Looking back, I think it was more devastating to me than I realized. I was reminded about 6th grade, back when I wasn't even used to the new school, and I was scared. Was I really as smart as I had been told? Was I as capable as I thought I was? Was I worthy of what I had been believing? A very dear friend of mine and I have both used the term imposter syndrome, even before we realized it was a real thing, as what we had been feeling. Is a feeling that you are afraid that you don't know what you already know, and you have to work harder and harder to prove it. Fast forward to this year, I was currently working with IBM. They were my employer during this time, and including during the contract change. I've been with them almost 2 years. They were keeping me employed while I worked on and pursued onto other contracts with them. I had just begun work on an exciting new project, one of the senior developers. However, it was short term, only about 6 to 7 months long. I needed something with more stability, but wasn't really looking, as I didn't want to leave the team in the lurch. Well, God works in mysterious ways. That dear friend that I mentioned, who was in the same boat as me, had gotten a call out of the blue from a colleague of ours who had left the LDAC contract several years ago. He had some openings and was looking for some folks with experience. Well, they spent 2 hours on the phone, and along the way he learned of our recent departure from LDAC. So he approached him with an opportunity, and shortly after approached me with an opportunity as well. Turns out he had thought about reaching out to me before, but had seen how comfortable I was with LDAC at the time. Needless to say, I was interested, but the nerves set in. I was invited to a phone interview with the deputy project manager. It actually went really well. I was nervous, but able to handle it. Then I realized that wasn't all that was required. I was then scheduled for a 3-hour technical interview with the programming team and the program director. The director who had been there with that contract in its many forms for almost 30 years. Remember when I mentioned imposter syndrome? Well, it leads me to sometimes be honest to a fault. And had told this team that I was not an expert in .NET and C# languages, which is what they were using at the time. In fact, I would probably be learning it as I got started. So I studied and crammed the days before that interview, learning everything that I could before I was on the Zoom interview with them. Was I going to oversell myself? Was I going to be able to meet the expectations that I was setting? Was I going to be worthy? There was a lot going on at the time as well. We had just lost a very close family member. My mom was sick and in the hospital. This was the possibility of a new job, including new people, new programming language, new processes, and all of it. Going back to school to finish my degree full-time, spending time to make sure that my boys were able to do well in school since they were doing it virtually, and that fear of still being able to provide for my family. Well, that old friend anxiety that I thought I'd conquered back after high school, he was back. He was back with a vengeance. I was debilitatingly sick to my stomach that day, scared to death that I wasn't going to be able to prove myself and that I'd be stuck where I was at. As an aside, this interview included an interesting story, and maybe a little too much for a Sunday morning, but a little levity doesn't hurt. I had to momentarily fake a sneeze off camera for only a few seconds during the interview. If you remember, I was debilitatingly sick to my stomach. I'll let you put 2 and 2 together there. Here's where God truly comes into the picture. As during this time that I realized more than ever before how important my family is, both my immediate family, but my church family as well. I remember talking to Pastor Todd about praying about this interview, knowing that it was what I wanted, but was praying that it was also what he wanted as well, he being God. My wife was always in my corner, reminding me that I was approached and that I didn't have to go looking for this opportunity. Reminding me of how I always figure it out and I always make my mark. My boys were praying for me every night. My mom and dad were praying for me. My friends were praying for me. I had prayers coming from every direction. Even with all the love and prayers, an excerpt from the book Kill a Spider by Carlos Whitaker describes the feeling that I had so well. It says, "Imagine for a moment you're surrounded by every single person in the world who loves you. They're celebrating who you are with a huge party. Everyone is waiting to talk to you and tell you they love you and that you're amazing. Sounds awesome. Now imagine you're in a spacesuit. You can barely hear what anyone is saying, and although you're being hugged, you can't feel anything. In the midst of not being alone, you feel completely alone." We don't always hear about this because, as my dad has called it, some of us are living our lives in quiet desperation. It also describes that incredibly loud silence. Well, it worked out. Despite my concern, despite my sneeze, I was given an instant offer of what I was asking. No need to negotiate. I was relieved for the moment. My eyes began to water up as I hugged Jess after the interview. I was okay, but this wasn't the end. I went to my doctor and he helped me get started on some medicine to help out, hoping that we'd be able to knock it out of the park and just get me back on my feet. Well, that didn't happen the way I'd hoped. In fact, it got much worse. Combining that medicine that I used to take with the medicines that I now take tripled my anxiety. Remember when I mentioned that I wasn't very emotional? I was incredibly emotional for the next several weeks. I had retreated away from the world, the real world, the virtual world, social world, all of it. Though I'd retreated inside both my home and myself, I tried to open up even more to God. I asked for strength, courage, and most of all, peace. I was always in fear that I wasn't doing enough, only to beat myself up more for not being able to help here at church. You see, despite all that was going on, I honestly still enjoyed helping with the media ministry, knowing that I could use my gifts to help the church. At first, I even felt that it was selfish to think that I could help make the church, our church, look even better, that I could be the one to help create our online presence. But after talking with my dad, I realized it wasn't selfish, but a blessing, and a way for me to share my own form of ministry and discipleship. I still had to go to work though. I believe that on my first day, which was in person, on my way to Huntsville, the Lord gave me a sign. Of all places, as I came across Whitesburg Bridge, I saw the side of a work truck. It said Proverbs 16:9. Normally, I'd see that and think nothing of it, but I decided that, yes, while I was driving, I would look it up. It reads, "In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Despite my fear, despite my concerns, it wasn't my plan, but His that I was following. It gave me some solace that day. Even though my body and mind were spinning, my spirit was keeping me in place. It wasn't easy that day, still dizzy, nauseous, and unable to really focus. Still freaking out a bit. I ate about 3/4 of a piece of bread that day, the entire day, but I survived. I was relieved, again, for the moment. I started working remotely the next day, but wasn't feeling much better. I was still praying for peace as I'd wake up in the morning with my whole body shaking. I'd pray for strength to make it through the daily Zoom meetings. I'd pray for wisdom as I dove into learning the new language, new processes, new team dynamic. I was barely able to leave the house for nearly a month. Just thinking about leaving would cause my panic to rise up all over again. I couldn't eat, I could barely drink, and I was nauseous all day long, to the point that I had lost 20 pounds in a very short period of time, which is a fantastic but incredibly unhealthy way to lose weight, by the way. I would break down in tears each night, but Jessica was my rock and it tore me up. The manly side of me said that I was supposed to be her rock, the support to keep her chin up despite all that had recently happened to her, in her life, and her family. But she was there for me and held me. One night I was unable to sleep. Tears were rolling down my cheeks, sobbing like I hadn't in a very long time, praying for it just to stop, for the emotional pain to go away. Jess did something amazing. She got up and said, "I know what I can do for you." You could almost hear the smile on her face in that dark room. She came back into her bedroom with this pocket prayer shawl, the same prayer shawl that she kept with her when her parents had passed, and kept her strong in the most difficult times. Yet she gave it to me. I was overwhelmed. I told her how much I thank God for her. I keep it with me every moment that I can. It was that Sunday that her and the boys went to church and I stayed home. I was in no condition to make it that morning. However, thanks to the graciousness and blessing of those standing in for me on the media team, I was able to watch it from the house. I was glad that I was alone, though to be honest, I wasn't. God was there with me. I was sitting up in bed, a blanket over my shoulders, still shivering from waking up. The music and the message were spot on. I may have been to all kinds of churches, but was never one to raise my arms in praise. But for that moment of peace, of hope, that I was finally able to experience, He deserved everything that I had. It was a blessing. It was a change in my life. I had always been a believer. I had always considered myself a pretty good Christian, but this felt so much closer than it had ever been. It was at this point that I made some decisions to truly be who I thought I was, who He thought I was, and who my wife thought I was, and who my friends and family thought I was. I was no longer an imposter, but I was me. It's still hard to accept that. I reached out to Pastor Todd, who helped me with reassurance and some things to read, some guidance and peace of mind that God was there. I'll talk more to my parents and thank them again for being there. I made sure that Jess knew how truly blessed that I was that she was a part of my life, that these last 20 years were no fluke, and that she was a huge part of the reason that I am who I am today, and also where I am today. I reassured the boys that I was okay and that things were getting better. I returned to my doctor and he changed around my prescriptions. Even though anxiety medicines are usually known to numb emotions to an extent, I told Jess while we were down at the beach for our 20th anniversary that when you're working with a God who can snap things into existence and literally move mountains, a little bit of medicine isn't going to stop him from reaching you. I knew that through God, the right things would come to be. I just need to be patient, and I still need to be patient. It was also at this point that I learned how much the words of that song that I mentioned meant to me. The song begins with "My fears."
I keep fighting voices in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just the sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know.
It then reminds me that they are my fears and not his fears. Instead, he provides hope.
You say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short, when I don't belong. Oh, you say I am yours, and I believe. Oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe.
I'm still a work in progress. Every day a little better than the last. None of us are perfect. We are all broken, but God knows that, and his grace is sufficient. We can't earn the love that he so freely gives away. You just have to be willing to give it all to him. So, it's with this I leave you some words of wisdom that I have learned along this journey. No matter the fears, no matter how weak you may feel, no matter how much of an imposter you may think you are, no matter how worthless you think you are, he believes in you. You are a child of God, and he wants to bless you. He wants to bless you so that you can bless others. He is there to hold your hand or carry you when you can no longer walk. Be the beach glass that Pastor Todd talked about in that previous series that we had done. God will make you into something beautiful. Thank you for this chance to share my story. I hope that it helps you realize how much God loves you, fears, failures, and all. He will take those failures, but he will be victorious. Also, if you'd like to share your story, but have the same reservations about standing in front of a crowd as I do, please let me know. I'll be glad to help. To do for others as you can do for yourself is never a burden, but a blessing. To give others the freedom to share their stories. You're all a blessing to me. Let me be a blessing to you. Thank you.